change Washington, and that's why I'm running for president. We are at a defining moment in our history, and we have seen the economy unravel over these last 19 months to the point where, as tough as it was 19 months ago, it's a lot tougher for American families all across the country now. You know the statistics. We have the highest unemployment rate in 5 years. They went up $7,500. Over the last 8 years, they've gone down $2,000. So if you think that you're working harder for less, you're right. Everywhere I go, I meet people who, even though their paychecks aren't getting bigger, are having to spend money on gas, on home heating oil, on groceries, on health care, and on college tuitions. It's harder to save. It's harder to retire. We've got the highest home foreclosure rate since the Great Depression. And even if you are at risk of losing your home, you've still seen your home values plummet during the last several years. So this is a desperate time for a lot of people. And a lot of folks here in New Hampshire are anxious and worried, not just about their immediate circumstance, but what does this mean for the American dream? What does this mean for the American promise? Are we going to pass on an America that is stronger and more unified and more prosperous than the one that we inherited from our parents? Because that's the essence of the American dream. It's not just for ourselves, it's for all of us. It means that we are making the sacrifices and exercising the good judgment and engaging in the hard but ultimately fulfilling work of making this country a better place. That's the task of every generation. And over the last 8 years, George W. Bush and the leadership in Washington has failed at that test. And that's why today, Democrats, but also independents and Republicans are listening to what we have to say. And they're desperately looking for somebody who can transform Washington and transform the country. And that's what we're here to say. Since we did a lot of campaigning in New Hampshire, you know that we've been talking about change since the beginning of this campaign.
Yeah.
We talked about change when we were up, and we talked about change when we were down. We talked about change when we won primaries and caucuses, and we kept on talking about change when we lost some. Because I've been convinced from the start that the American people are looking for something new, for something different. Now, in this general election, John McCain spent most of the election running on the fact that he's been in Washington 26 years.
Yep.
He said that's what you need, is somebody who's seasoned, somebody with experience. You remember the arguments they were making. But I guess this change thing must be catching on, because for the last week and a half, John McCain says he's an agent for change in Washington. For a moment, examine John McCain's argument that he's for change. Now he's been in Washington for 26 years. He, for the last 8 years, has voted with George W. Bush 90% of the time. He bragged about this during the Republican primary. He said, nobody's been more supportive than me when it comes to George W. Bush.
That's right.
He was proud of his support. He agrees with George Bush that we've made great economic progress over the last 8 years. And he says that the economy's fundamentals are sound. These are quotes from John McCain. His chief economic advisor was quoted not once but twice suggesting that, in recession going on, we had a mental recession going on, and that it was all in your heads, and that we Americans have become a nation of liars. His healthcare advisor said the other day that we don't really have a problem with the uninsured because everybody has access to the emergency room. That's a quote.
Where?
His education advisor was quoted just a couple of days ago in the newspaper saying John McCain really hasn't been paying much attention to education policy. It's not something he's really been focused on. John McCain has said that you don't really get rich until you've made $5 million. Which means if you make $4 million, you're just going to scrape it by. That's consistent with George Bush's policies, and it's consistent with what John McCain's proposed, because what he said is that he is not only going to continue the Bush tax cuts for some of the wealthiest Americans, but he now wants to provide $300 billion in additional tax breaks to some of the largest corporations in America, including ExxonMobil. They would get oil companies would get $4 billion in tax breaks at a time that they are breaking all records in terms of profits. Meanwhile, 100 million Americans would not get a dime's worth of tax relief under John McCain's plan. So, John McCain's economic policies are identical to George Bush's. His tax policies are identical to George Bush's. His healthcare policy, calling for the taxing of healthcare benefits for the first time in American history, identical to George Bush's. His education policy, which is essentially nothing except arguing for vouchers, identical to George Bush's. His foreign policy of maintaining more troops in Iraq than we had pre-surge is George Bush's. And the style of politics that he's been operating over the last several weeks is straight out of Karl Rove's playbook. Other than that, John McCain really intends to shake up Washington. I mean, how does somebody plausibly argue that they're trying to bring about change when their policies are identical to what we've seen over the last 8 years? They must think that the American people are stupid. I didn't think so.